Welcome to the Independent Characters, episode 218. This is Carl.
This is Josh.
Thanks for joining us. This episode, we are going to be talking about Aeronautica Imperialis, then and now, and how those differ and how they're more the same than I realized, actually. Yeah. So I think it's a very interesting topic for a game that its re-release I kind of dismissed. I never got into the first go around just because of things we'll talk about, but then you might hear my dog in the background occasionally. She has a little bit of separation anxiety, and then we'll talk about why I didn't get into it the second time, but now I may be reassessing
why you missed out.
So that being said, let's first launch into our elite choice.
Absolutely.
Why don't you go first?
Okay. Yeah. So I chose, and I'm sorry in advance for butchering your name, but Matt O'Fallon, which he
Fowlane.
I don't. It's Dutch or it's something else.
We're gonna butcher it. Anyway.
Sorry. So yeah,
Matt. Sorry.
Yeah. Matt Fowlane, you did a fantastic job. That what he did was Grasgal Thraka was not big enough. This is the biggest 40K single character model that there is aside from like a demon model, right? But Grasgal was not big enough. So he took the Glotkin, a Gorkanaut, and a bunch of bits, and he made his own Grasgal. And he did an amazing, yeah. He did an amazing.
Is it Grasgal?
I always say Grasgal.
I thought it was Gazgal. I think it's Gazgal.
Yeah, maybe I spelled it wrong in this one, but I'm not sure.
Arya, how's it spelled? She doesn't know. All right.
It's just a inspired vision of seeing these kids, putting them together, seeing that one of the hugest, biggest, baddest orcs that is out there is not big or bad enough for him. So he took it to the next level, made it bigger, made it badder, did an amazing job sculpting it,
it's incredible
painting
looking.
it, and he did a fantastic job with the paint job and execution of it too. So hats off to you, sir. It's really
so
well
good.
done. Yeah,
he's hideous.
He's
hideous.
Well, the Glotkin really comes through, and it makes him kind of a gross orc, less cartoony, but I think it's really fitting at the same time.
I remember when Steve, I'm dropping the ball on his name. He was Black Library author, wrote Death Watch, also wrote Rin's World, Steve Parker.
Yes.
When Steve Wright, that's a comedian. When Steve Parker wrote Rin's World, like he wrote the orcs, like not comedic. They were pretty amazing, actually, and pretty horrifying. I love it.
Nice.
I love the humor of them. Like, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But I really appreciate when they're like done really dark and scary.
Yeah.
I know they're scary, are you?
It's also more of a past editions of 40K had the humor element more so.
Yes.
Now they still have that orc kind of random wackiness, but I think that fluff is getting a little bit, the lore is getting a little darker and more serious, and I think that is
sometimes
translating to orcs more so.
They still have a nice comedic streak.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Anyway,
Yep.
Mine was Mark Kilburn. Mark is working on his board for his Armies on Parade.
Yeah.
And he was sharing like the work he was doing on the board. I'm like, yeah, great. Let me see more of those models.
Oh.
His Gene Stealer cult conversion vehicles and everything are incredible. And not only are they just unique and cool looking, like I love the walker and everything.
Yeah.
This
so
is
much
exactly
conversion work here.
how I anticipate like a Gene Stealer cult kind of uprising from a mine, they're taking all the mining tools and mining vehicles and all this stuff, but the paint job on them is fantastic too. And did you see like he's added like the electricity with the wires,
he's got, like
and
Tesla arcing kind of feel going? And what I commented on this one is like each model kind of tells its own story, in that it's all very cohesive, but it's all very kind of I don't know. Sorry, I got distracted by the dog.
I may have to have her kicked out.
Yeah, that's all right.
All right. Anyway, yes, it is like thematically very cool. It is well painted.
Yeah.
The power coils look amazing. Like the whole army, I was like, oh man, that is incredible.
Yeah, it's that was a you'd already grabbed that one. Otherwise, that would have been a close choice for me as well.
Yeah. I had to get in there first and steal it.
Yeah, it's so good.
Okay, hobby progress in Workbench. I have not completed my Ashwace Nomads. I did get some more colors on them, but I went out of town for about 5 days is I went out to Montreal, a city I've never been to before. If you happen to be from that area, you have an amazing city. It very much feels like a European city, and cobblestone roads, old architecture. Of course, everybody's speaking French.
Yeah.
But what a great trip it was. It was all for Formula One. I've just been a little sidetracked with all that. So, didn't get as much painting as I wanted to get done. The one thing I did do, though, finally, Games Workshop has released the points for 10th edition.
Yeah.
So I was able to go through, and the app, which I quite like the app for building an army. But the nice thing about the app being available and the points is now I was able to see what do I need to build to for my Black Legion army.
Right. Yeah.
And as it turns out, my old build will not work anymore because my old build allied in a Chaos Knight and 2 War Dogs, which I just like thematically in my head. Like I'm picturing this knight flanked by these 2 War Dogs, and out in front of them is this force of Chaos Space Marines and maybe some cultists and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know that unfortunately I can only take a knight or War Dogs. So at the moment, I think my initial list I included a knight, and then the second one I included the 2 War Dogs. But the way the points are working out now for me too, it does lower, like the points seem lower. They're all divisible by 5, which is kind of nice at the moment.
Yeah.
It's really a mix between power level and points. So
it is, yeah.
Kind of Age of Sigmar.
Yep.
So I appreciate how quickly I can build the force.
Yeah.
But I can get more into it than I could before. So I can fit in a Land Raider or something like that. And I'm super excited.
Yeah, I think the games are as advertised. The games are 1,000 points, 2,000 points, 3,000 points. Right. So it's bigger chunks. Where I guess we are more frequently playing at like 1,500 points or 1,750 or something like that.
And I'm probably getting my first game in this weekend. So I'll see. In looking at the rules, it feels more killy.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see how that actually plays out.
Yep. I think, tanks feel a little bit more survivable, but everything else seems just about as killy. I think troops are maybe a little less killy because there's, I think...
I mean, about getting killed.
They'll get killed just as easily, but AP across the board seems to be come down a couple of points here and there. It makes your power armor might actually make you a little bit more survivable.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. So this will be my first game this weekend.
Nice.
A small game. I'm going to start with Aaron. So
nice, perfect.
We'll see. What about you? You got way more hobby progress than I did.
A couple things. The big thing that I got was the Corrupted Reaver Titan. Finally got that finished. Really happy with how that turned out. It was kind of a kit bash, a little bit of green stuff sculpting in there. It's got wings, it's got a claw, it's got some demonic parts in there, got a demonic head. That's the Zinch head from the Demon Prince kit that Brian hooked me up with.
Good.
But then I did some sculpting to give it a neck, and the horns are from another kit. So just kind of a fun combination. I wanted to give him a giant chain fist, but I realized I'd already built on my chain fist as left-handed.
I see what you did.
But the claw that I had there is left-handed already, and that's part of the Vostor kit, the kind of Dark Mechanicus Demon Prince, which I also used the wings and tail from, which was just super fitting for bringing a corrupted Titan to life with using some of those more mechanical Demon Prince bits. So that was really fun, really happy with how it turned out. And then similarly, points dropped for 10th edition for the indexes and the points, and Combat Patrol list also came out. So I prioritized a few of my Necron units to be painting towards that. So
I hadn't played Combat Patrol.
I
did not realize they basically say, here's your list.
It's a set list now, right?
And so what's interesting is as many Thousand Sons as I have. Don't have the right Thousand Sons.
Oh, interesting.
For the Combat Patrol, there's like one new sorcerer character that had come out that I hadn't ever done. Yeah. So then I looked at the Chaos Space Marine list, and I'm like, oh, this is not like what I would want to do.
Sure.
And
so
I'm like, okay. You know, I'm still down for trying it, and playing it. I think it's certainly very smart way to start the game.
Absolutely.
We sell you a Combat Patrol you can immediately play. I don't know how much Combat Patrol I'll play.
It's interesting talking to people because some people who have been in the hobby for a really long
Love
time, like that's what is exciting them right now.
Yeah.
Like they're kind of here for that and not full games of 40K. I think full 40K is always going to call to me.
I agree.
I've got the toys. I want to play with the toys if I've got the time. Like I love just, setting a couple hours aside to hang out with a friend and play a game and use a bunch of stuff, and just more time and opportunity for things to happen.
But it would
end up balancing.
It would allow you to throw together, like especially an event very quickly where you're just like, it's a combat patrol day. Everybody's bringing a combat
for
patrol.
Sure. And
that's it.
And hopefully it's super balanced. And I'm sure this edition, especially with a digital release so far of everything, points, stats, etc., like they can adjust stuff pretty easily on the fly if they're doing a whatever quarterly or adjustment. And I'm sure combat patrols they'll adjust those units probably on the rule side more so than what's in the box. So if you don't like what's in the box, then that's maybe not the faction you want to combat patrol with, because those boxes are being sold as complete kits.
I still think that's brilliant.
Yeah, totally.
It's almost like, about time.
Yeah.
Because like you'd get those, they would do the army boxes, which are the big ones, but then they do I can't remember what
the Battle Force box.
The Battle Force box. Yeah. And the Battle Force box was never really playable.
Right.
But now it's like, get this and you're playing.
And that's
very smart.
That's a game. That's a good place to start. You can grow into it from there. Everything is going to be useful from what I've seen for the most.
You know what we should do?
Yes.
We should do the Space Marine Tyranid combat patrols from the starter box.
And
you and I will play that.
Those are baked in.
Because I'm picking it up tomorrow at Herrick Games up in the mountains, and then bring it back here, and you get the Space Marine half. I'm just going to immediately assemble all the Tyranids.
Nice. The combat patrol game sounds great.
I think that'd be super. Yeah. It'd be a great way of learning out the rules too.
You get to play Tyranids. It's a good way to learn the rules, and it's already built in that way. So it's a great way to start a new edition.
Too. I think it's very smart.
So as part of that combat patrol thing, and some people just expressing interest, I prioritized a couple of the Necron models that I've had in my backlog for a while. I was already working on the Canoptic Doomstalker.
Is this a basic Necron unit, or is this a Forge World Necron unit?
This is a basic Necron unit. This is a
I didn't recognize
GW Prime kit. Yeah, so I bought 2 of those when 9th dropped and have them built, and that was about it. So it's kind
of very War of the Worlds.
It is very War of the Worlds, which
I love it.
I like it. I don't know if you've seen the Canoptic Reanimator either, which is somebody that. It's similar. It's a little bit smaller, similar design, super long, lanky legs, and it's more of a support unit to bring back warriors and other things.
That's
nearby.
awesome.
But it has that same kind of vibe. So the Necron's range has evolved quite a bit from when I started in 2nd edition. There was 2 models, so it's evolved. The latest release is great. So since I wasn't playing a lot of 9th, I had these models, but I didn't have a lot of reason to get them painted because I interests that take me into Titanicus and Necromunda and things like that. So I'm been putting time into that and wanted to prioritize for those as part of the build. And the other thing I did was the Scorptech Destroyers, which are the more melee-oriented Necron units. They are part of the combat patrol specifically, so I prioritized them. I've jumped them up in the priority of painting. Just so I do have that combat patrol ready to go.
Gotcha.
Out of what's in that list, that was the only thing missing.
Gotcha.
Out of my collection to field them. So, and then I just got a bunch of base coating done on some other models that will get painted up within due order.
Yeah. Moving on to games played. Why don't you start, and then I'll finish off with our game that we just played.
Sounds good. So Brian and I got together and we played a 2,000-point game of Titanicus. And 2,000 points is slightly larger than a standard game. Standard is about 1,750 or so. Where we played 2000s because he wanted to bring his Iconoclast, and that is the War Master platform, but it's the melee-oriented War Master. So it's double melee. He's got a giant chain sword. He's got a big old fist and a ton of guns built up onto him. It was really, really fun game. We played the Open Engine War deck, which is again the cards.
Yep.
One of the things we got was a Forge World. And out of that, everybody got a battlefield asset. So you got one of those ground assets like an Apocalypse missile launcher or a Void shield relay, plasma generator, things like that you used in our games at Adepticon, you remember, for helping venting plasma. So we each took one of the more offensive ones. He took the Apocalypse missiles and I took a giant macro macro cannon, and we're like, oh, these might not do anything. They ended up playing a huge role in the game, which was surprising. He actually ended up getting an engine kill with his Apocalypse missile launcher on my Princeps, which was a Reaver Titan, and I ended up immobilizing his Iconoclast right before it could get a devastating charge. He definitely would have just aced the Warlord had I not gotten this free shot with this free asset that I got to immobilize his Iconoclast.
That had to feel good.
It was
That had to feel good.
So super fun. I was playing my newly fielded Corrupted Reaver, which was super fun to play with. He ended up getting 2 engine kills, which was very satisfying. It's a double melee Reaver, so his job is to get up there and get stuff done, and he got work done. And then Brian set up, it was 3 stratagems that he dropped to just do this kind of supercharge on the Iconoclast. So it was going to teleport through the warp, get extra dice, get extra distance, get extra charging. There's 3 different stratagems to make it he charged automatically because he was playing Corrupted also. Mm-hmm. He had something that was going to give him extra range to his charge because it's a fairly slow platform. Like it's this huge Titan. So they're slow and steady. They're lumbering for sure. But he stacked a bunch of things to get this ridiculous charge potential on there. And then the teleport is 2d6 in a straight line, and he rolled a 2. So he had spent his entire wad of stratagem points trying to set up the super thing. Then he rolls a 2.
Amazing.
So then he ends up having to countercharge my Corrupted Titan instead, which is not what he had planned on doing.
When you do that, because it's happened to all of us.
Yeah.
Do you feel like? Is there something that gives me a reroll here? I always feel like, can I spend
There are so few rerolls in Titanicus, which is part of the fun of the game. But
same with Aeronautica Imperialis, as we'll discuss in a little bit.
Absolutely. So he pulled out the small victory of charging the Reaver and absolutely decimated the Corrupted Reaver. He destroyed it and just off the charge. We didn't even get to combat. So it was a very impressive death of an Iconoclast charging in and taking this Reaver out. But then he wasn't able to really get into the Warlords. I had 2 Warlords and 3 Reavers, which is really where he wanted to get that Iconoclast into a Warlord to just, do some real damage and take the real points down.
I'm both disappointed for Brian and amused.
It was. And that's exactly kind of how it was. It's like I was disappointed for him, but it was really fun at the same time. Of like, oh.
That's a real shame.
Well, it's still fun. Like he still got to kill something. And it was just really fun game. Always great playing a game of Titanicus, and Brian especially is great opponent. So super fun.
Okay, so then you and I played a game of Aeronautica Imperialis, the new version of it.
Yes.
Now, my first introduction to Aeronautica Imperialis was actually with Justin Hill, the Black Library author. When I went out to Warhammer World one time. He's really into it, and he was like, let's play this. I said, I've never played it. He goes, I'll show you. It's super easy. We played it. We had a great time. And at that point, I gathered up the Forge World books. Yeah. I think I already had one, and then I bought one from somebody else.
Okay.
And I mean, it's a great game. And unfortunately, it's no longer supported. Yeah. I mean, hypothetically, you could, either 3D print models, or you could even use the current models. Yeah. And they would work just fine with Aeronautica Imperialis, the original version. But we played the current version, which is on a hex grid, and we'll talk about some of the differences coming up. And in a previous episode, I had talked about that game. We knew this was coming up, and I had said I really felt like you just kind of mashed up in the middle, and that was it. And I was less impressed. And to be fair, I don't think I gave the game a fair shake. You had said at the time, did you play a mission or just dogfight? I said, we just dogfight. He goes, so much is dependent on the missions in this game. And I said, oh, okay. We just played a mission where I was trying to escort a bomber across the board. That didn't happen.
Spoiler alert.
Somebody rolls straight 6s.
Yeah.
Four 6s.
Multiple extra damage last game.
God, dude.
I think I did 5 points of damage.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But I have to reassess the game. Like, we finished that game, and I started looking, okay, what do I need to buy?
Not a lot
to play. And it turns out you don't have to buy much. My one holdback is I'm a big Chaos player. There is no Chaos faction currently in it. You could run a, Imperial Navy faction, call it Chaos, I suppose. But I think that's the one thing I'm like, well, where's the chaos, you know? But failing that, I'm trying to see if I can scratch out some Eldar stuff, and I'll just paint it in the scheme of the Sheldar, and off we go. I think that'd be really, really cool. So,
Yes, yeah.
I got to tell you, like, we played that game. You were like, do you want to re-rack and play again? The only reason I didn't is because I knew we had to record and we got to get things done. And I was like, because this was really fun, and it played super quick.
Right.
And yeah, I think my thought there was, you rolled those 5 and you rolled all the damage, and I'm like, I don't. Don't I get a save?
You don't get a save. We're one of the few Games Workshop games you don't get
no
an
save.
armor save in.
No save. But you don't need a lot of dice either. I mean, we were rocking with like 6 dice.
Yeah, really, you need like 7 dice.
And
I think
it played
is the biggest,
super quick.
biggest dice pool that would have happened in the game.
Yeah, I think, as we'll talk about, the longest pull of the game when you're playing is really the decision-making thing. And we talked about, if you've ever played the board game Robo Rally, you have to kind of decide in advance what direction your guys are going to move. And you can spend a lot of time going, okay, what am I going to do? And what do I think he's going to do? And you could get, if you're not a quick decision maker, you can get too wrapped up in that. But then you don't get to do the Robo Rally dance.
But then you get to do the robot dance.
That's right.
Left, turn it around.
I'm going to turn left, then it'll turn.
Then I'll be backwards. Then I got a moonwalk.
Yeah. So I had a great time, Josh, great. To the point where I was like, okay, I want to at least get an army to play. And we'll talk about why and how I feel this adds to the repertoire of what Games Workshop has coming up soon. So, I guess that's it for Games Play. Maybe we should just take a short break, come back, and kick off the main topics.
Sounds great. Right. Yeah, let's get into it.
We'll be right back. All right, and we're back. So I think the way we're going to break this down is I will talk about the original Aeronautica Imperialis, and then you'll kind of lead the discussion on the new version, Aeronautica Imperialis.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And then at the end of that, we'll kind of talk about our summaries and where we think benefits and drawbacks are.
Yep.
Okay, so the original Aeronautica Imperialis, and I think I'm just going to call it AI.
Yes.
I keep tripping over that. The original books were Forge World only. So they were hardback Forge World books. And for people who are newer to the 40K scene that may be listening to the show, there was a time, if you think Forge World is difficult to get now,
right, yeah.
There was a time where Forge World was really hard to get, like to the point where when I placed a Forge World order, I would call from California to the UK, get their customer service, say, here is the order I want to make. I would read them my credit card number over the phone. They would bill me and then send me an email receipt, and then they would ship me.
Bill you in pounds also, because there was no
correct.
There's no U.S. site or anything like that.
Yeah,
currency. It was all billed in pounds, so you're paying foreign currency transactions. And
right.
all that.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so it was difficult. And this was a period of time. It's interesting now that people are talking about, with 10th edition coming out, things going into Legends and people getting upset about, I've lost all these things in Legends. Like, there was a time, and you can go back to our archive, where people were adamant against Forge World being in their games.
Yep.
They were out of balance and blah, blah. And they did have there were some issues there.
Yes. Yeah.
But they were still fun to play with.
Flavorful.
And I distinctly remember making a prediction. I don't remember what episode it's in, but somebody could go back there and find it. And I said, I think 5 years from now, we will not be having a discussion about should Forge World models be allowed in games or not.
Right. Yeah.
And we definitely reached that point.
Yep. And
now they're kind of pulling back from it a bit, but they're moving more things into the plastic range.
I think it's more of how they're changing production than anything.
Yeah. And this is going to, and why I bring that up is because this is important to what this game was and what it is. And Forge World themselves, because of the production and the way it was done, cannot mass produce the amount of models that a plastic run of models can produce. It's just not feasible. I mean, they still produce a lot, but it's not really mainstream, I would say. It was initially at the time, a sidearm of Games Workshop.
Yes.
And, it was run differently. It kind of wasn't under that umbrella. It still was owned by Games Workshop. They were still Games Workshop employees running it, but it was a very different relationship with the customer. And so when this game came out, I knew about it. I wasn't particularly interested. I was fully invested in Warhammer 40,000. But not only that, in order to get the books, you had to order them from Forge World.
Right, yeah.
And then to get the models, you had to all order them
Also
from Forge World,
yeah.
which really hobbled the game's production. So, not popularity.
Yeah.
Because it's a great game, but even Battlefleet Gothic was plastic.
True, right.
This game was never plastic until now. So it came out in 2 books, and you have the first book, which is originally, the original game rule book. And then you have the second book, which is the expansion rule book. And I'll talk about both of those. So the game rule book runs about 180 pages or so. It discusses, and it also comes with 2 sets of cards. Now it's a cardstock sheet. You have to cut the cards out, but it came with it. And these cards were necessary for setting down in front of your model and showing how the model would turn.
Yeah, that's how you set your maneuvers.
That's right. You would set maneuvers, because this book covers how to play the game, how to build a squadron, which is points. Everything's worth points, and this is how you would build it. Though it's fairly simplified compared to like Warhammer 40,000.
Sure, yeah.
And then it had rules for the following forces: Imperial Navy, Space Marines, Tau Air Cadre, the Orc Air Wa, the Eldar Skyhost, and the Chaos Raiders. Almost all those represented now, except Chaos. The book then contains many famous or infamous Forge World color plates, as we call it, the thing that Jeff, my original co-host, loved about Forge World.
His favorite.
This is his favorite part.
How many rhinos in different colors can we see?
That's right.
No rhinos in this book, Jeff.
No, just airplanes.
Just airplanes.
But, I think it was, I don't know. I think that's an important part of it. And I do enjoy looking at it. But honestly, how often do you have to look at it? There's a lot of background for each type of aircraft. So typical of Forge World books in this day, it'd be like, here's the Thunderbolt. And then it'd go into detail. Here's what Thunderbolts were used for, and blah, blah, blah. And they fought in this
some notable
missions and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then here's the actual stats for the Thunderbolt. And then there's usually like a, what looks like plans drawing of them. But you would get a lot of background on some of these, even expansion stuff to races.
Oh, cool.
In some of these books, like things you wouldn't typically know. For example, the Orc Fighter Bomber, right? Like under the Orc Fighter Bomber, there's difference on, what it is and blah, 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 and here, blah, blah, blah. But then it drops this little nugget, right? Orc pilots are themselves outcasts from Orc society. Most Orcs prefer to keep their feet firmly on the ground and believe real fighting is done up close and personal. There are some unstable individuals among a tribe that crave to fly through the sky like a bird. The Orcs call them flyboys, and they all belong to a subcult known as speed freaks.
It's not surprising.
It seems that for a flyboy, their demand for extra speed cannot be satisfied by land-based vehicles, and they take to the sky in search of ever greater exhilaration. Their reckless flying, diving, bombing, and strafing runs, as well as their search for greater and greater speeds, seem to change their brainwave patterns, inducing a state of manic euphoria. Other Orcs consider them to be quite mad and avoid them. Flyboys live a semi-exile from the tribal hierarchy, only associating with other flyboys, Gretchen slaves and gunners and mech boys who build and maintain their aircraft.
Interesting.
So that's my point. Like within these Forge World books, there's always those nuggets, which may have been copied over. I'm not super familiar with the Orc Codex at this point, but this is kind of where some of this originates, because they really didn't have planes
Right,
for
yeah.
armies back
Rocket
when this
jets
came
weren't in
out.
40K yet.
No,
right? No plastic kit there.
They all came from here.
And I'm sure there's Tau Aircast and things like that
Yep,
of that similar
absolutely.
nature in there. Yeah,
Absolutely. I'll talk about that
Cool.
in a minute. And actually, you get to see a picture of a Tau Aircast guy. It's pretty awesome. Then the book contains scenarios. So there's 12 different scenarios presented here. 6 are for what they call small games, and 6 are for large games, and tables that you would randomly determine what kind of scenario you're going to play. They can contain special rules such as landing for troops, smoke blanketing the air, make it harder to see, or special actions like rescuing troops from the ground, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot more variation than just dogfighting.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about that a lot, because this game surprises me. Not just the first edition, but the new edition surprises me on how much variation there really is with just airplanes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, thematically, there is some really cool stuff going on here. It goes from the scenarios to campaigns, and rules for running what they call air superiority campaigns are included in here as well. The campaign system runs in turns. It's fairly straightforward. You pick your campaign strategies. You get like special strategies. You receive your missions. Winning missions give you campaign points. The first person to 7 points wins, but you can spend those points for other things, because if aircraft are destroyed, you don't get them back.
Right.
Aircraft that are damaged are considered to get repaired, but then you can buy like reinforcements with your campaign points, which moves you further away from
but gets you what you need the right tools for the job.
That's right.
Cool.
But it's very similar to a lot. You pick attacker defender, you determine mission size, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a fairly basic campaign system, but it works for this.
Sure.
Let's see. Pilots can also increase skill, right? So they become ace pilots at 5 kills, and so it's important you keep track of them. And double aces, I think, is what's called at 10 kills, and that increases their ability to shoot down like other, like they get better.
You get a reroll, or you get a.
I think it just lowers their shot, their ballistic skill.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
So, and then you have Appendix A, which contains a page for photocopying to track your force, and quick reference sheets for various fighters and bombers. And then Appendix 2 has examples of painted models and terrain. And so this is where I thought there was a big difference between the current version and this version. And there's a little bit of a difference.
There are differences, but
this game is played with tape measures and cards to turn your angle, and you're encouraged. It's played almost exclusively on a 4x6 board.
Yeah.
It could be played on smaller, but the idea was a 4x6 is standard. They give examples of here's boards we built that have this various terrain. Things have changed over the years in terms of how people are playing the game. Most of us now use mats that we roll out, table war, and
supplement. Yeah, supplement a 2D mat with 3D terrain built on top of that.
Right. Yeah. So I could absolutely see that being done with this version. Yep. I was not aware you could use terrain with the new version.
There's a couple options. I'll cover when we get there. But
yeah. So this game was very much about, in 40K in general, all of these games that we play, to me, is very much a visual thing.
Yeah.
We could play. We could have played during the pandemic online.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, struggled through the terrible interface. And I know people who did. That was not the game for me.
Yep.
The game for me is looking at the cool models, looking at the scenes, seeing how they play out, having fun, taking cool pictures, drinking a beer or soda or whatever you want, This version of him is I think much more visually stimulating than the current version, because it removes a lot of the game elements that you're seeing on the board.
Visually, I guess I don't know if it's more or less abstracted depending on how you look at it. Because you don't have the hexes on the board there, so it's.
Let me put it this way.
Yeah.
When I used to play with the what was the narrative gaming group that Zach and those. And it's still going.
Fault Line.
Fault Line.
Yeah.
The Fault Line Gaming Group. They're still doing it. I just haven't been involved in it in a long time. Whenever they would take pictures of the games, they would make sure they removed like any ruler that was sitting on the table, dice that were sitting on the table, because they were trying to
get that immersion.
Yeah. I think the hexes on the grid for the new version breaks that for me a little bit. Like, we were playing on your fantastic map by Table War, but I almost wish those hexes were even fainter than they are, because it really does move it from me from a narrative experience a little bit. From a narrative experience to I'm playing a game.
It's very mechanical, whereas had those faded, it
feels more artistic.
You get a little bit more of the immersion, more of that kind of narrative in there by just letting it seamlessly flow.
Is that a differentiator that would make me go, I'm not going to play a new one. I'm going to continue to play the old one. Not after today. Not after today. And the fact that this game is no longer supported is a big deal. I mean, you can still play it.
Yeah.
You can play it with the models that they are releasing today. Those units are in here.
Yeah. Yep. Are the Marine units in there?
They actually have in the original one the Thunderhawk carrier.
Oh, right. That's right. Yeah.
And so there's actually more.
Which I think to my understanding, the only Space Marine units in the original AI were Thunderhawks. They didn't have possible. The Xiphons or...
I think the Xiphon came out later.
Yeah. I think the plastic kits were the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and they were based on a Forge World kit for 40K.
Right. Yep.
30K slash 40K.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's like the one thing that I have, like, I'm like, and I get why they've done it. We'll talk about this when we talk about the Prime Edition that's come out. But the Forge World Edition. So then let me talk about the second book that came out for it, which was just the rules expansion. It's a much lighter book. It's 128 pages, which at the time, I think was key. It had to hit that 128 page mark for them to put it in hardback. That has changed in the year, as printing has gotten cheaper and whatnot.
Sure. Yeah.
But there's a lot of fluff in this book that I'm like, this didn't really belong in a hardback Imperial armor book, but the reason you put it in there was because you were trying to pad the pages a little bit. You could have just thrown some more color plates in there for all intents and purposes.
Just for Jeff.
But yeah, but what's in there is it's not to say it's not valuable. It's just, did this need to be in this book? No, it could have been in a White Dwarf article. So anyway, there is new aircraft. There's the Marauder variants, the Orc Bomber at this point, the Remora drone fighters and aircraft upgrades for each faction, including like stuff like ejector seats, flares and chaff launchers, infrared targeting, like all these additions, like just new stuff as new as the game evolves, right?
Yeah.
There's new squadron lists now, which replace the old squadron lists. So there's new points it says use these, don't use the ones in the original book. There's data sheets for all the new aircraft that are introduced. And then there's the Typha 4 campaign. And this is a Tau versus Imperial Navy campaign. And this is a classic Forge World campaign. And what I mean by that is, if you don't have Imperial Navy or Tau, you're not participating in this campaign. Yeah. And this is what Jeff and I used to call future history.
It's the historic battle format.
Right. Yeah. Hey, here was the battle that took place. And here's this big, long description about, it wasn't just the battle, but the whole war, right? And here's these long descriptions of these various air battles that took place and where they were and why they were important and who was involved. And it was these units and these units. So if you're going to play this mission, you have to play these units and these units. And so if you don't have those units, you're going to need those units and those units to play the mission. And, and then in the end, the Tau learned, that they got their butts kicked and, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, why am I playing it? But this comes from classic wargaming.
Yeah.
Yes. We're going to play the Battle of Gettysburg and see what happened. You're reenacting future history is what we're doing.
Yep.
It was the Imperial Armor Necron book, like 12, Fall of Orpheus.
Fall of Orpheus, yep.
That all changed. And Alan wrote this campaign system. I think Alan and John wrote it. and it was open-ended. It was like, this is what's happened, and now you decide the outcome.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh,
your games get to determine
that's awesome.
where the story goes.
Now, still
choose
in that
your
one,
own adventure.
But in that one, you were still like, look, you're playing IG, you're playing Space Marines, you're playing Necrons.
Right.
Like it was still very much
still prescribed, but not as prescribed.
Yeah. And we took that format and just rewrote it for you're playing against Tyranids.
Yep.
And here's the way, the way the campaign scores out, and et cetera, et cetera. So it was a great system that they came up with. And that's actually evolved into what is being run in 30K even now.
Yeah.
But the Type of 4 campaign, as I said, classic Forge World campaign, future history, you did get some cool Tau background in it. And some beautiful art plates. And as I said, including this Tau cast warrior, which is just awesome. I think the Tau look cool as an alien race to begin with, but this is a very neat painting of them. You have a new campaign system introduced for IA at this point. And it's pretty much like the standard campaign system, but there's personalized battlefields to this thing. So it gives a little bit of variation, and we always love more missions.
Does it still play tracking kills specifically?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And then after that, they introduced like a tournament scenario. There's just like one tournament scenario. It's kind of like dogfight.
Your match play dogfight.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of dull, but then they added this canyon run scenario, which is kind of cool. And they're just giving you a few options. They give rules for ground installations. So like how you bomb various ground installations and what they do. And then starts the kind of hobby section. They show you like, here's some airfields we built, so that you could see what these look like. And they were, I have to admit, they were very inspiring because we looked at that, and this was kind of the start of, we should do a spaceport, which still is not built to this day. I think Adon in his game room
has one work in progress.
It's still a work in progress, right? Someday, maybe. I'm not in a big hurry to do it anymore. So you see that, and then there's a battle report included between Warwick Kinraid, who's the creator of the game, very much a treadhead from what I understood. And so it's between him and another individual. I don't remember the other individual's name. It's very much a White Dwarf battle report.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, why is this in this book and not in White Dwarf?
To show you how to play it.
Okay.
You've already bought the book, so.
Cool. Like it, again, you're kind of padding it, but I think that lends to its niche kind of presence in the Warhammer 40K universe. And we'll talk about that in a second too. There's new combat record sheets because you have kind of some new rules in play there. And then there's some hobby articles, which really consists of basically, they call it hobby articles, but it's really like tactical advice. Why would you do this? Why would you do that? What you should think about. That's
useful. Yeah.
That's useful. No problem.
This is before Warhammer Community existed. To be fair. So that was.
Yeah, I think
White Dwarf really was the only other spot.
I think the Warhammer message boards were in play at this point, which melted down at one point.
I don't know.
And then in the back of it is an FAQ.
Okay.
So again, I think there's things that could have been in White Dwarf. That's cool, but at least you have it compiled here.
Sure, yeah.
And that's cool because again, this is a very niche game. Not a lot of people are playing it. It probably didn't even get into White Dwarf because they're like, look, nobody wants this article. So how popular is the game? Right? We were just discussing. Super niche.
Yep.
Like the difficulty of getting the models, of getting the rules, of finding somebody else who's going to play it. And by the way, the models were not cheap.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so
exclusively Forge World resin, Imperial Armor books.
Yep.
So you're paying
for the books. $75, $80 at least.
You're paying for the books. You're paying for the models. They're harder to find. Again, this is like just fully integrated Forge World, so just harder to find because of that.
Yeah. So my take on it is probably not a top seller, but it was like it is also Epic scale, and so kind of designed to work there as well. But
Epic wasn't being supported at the time.
No.
Titanicus didn't exist yet.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So. So in general, the game was played on a 4x6 area. The turn, which was funny because as we jumped into the new edition, you choose your maneuvers.
Yep.
secretly, right? You roll for initiative.
Check for tailing fire.
Check for tailing fire, meaning if you're behind somebody, there's some specific things you get to shoot at them again.
Yep.
You then do your movement, and it's
alternating
activation,
yeah.
which is super
is one
fun.
of the first games that I think Games Workshop did this with also.
Yeah, and I do appreciate
more
that.
of a nod to just modern game design.
Yep. So then you alternate your movement, you alternate your firing, and then there's the end phase.
Yep.
And roll for initiative, do it all over again.
Here we go.
Yeah. And it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's not super complicated. If you have played any Warhammer 40K game, you're going to pick this up in one turn.
This is one of the easier games to play.
For sure. There's fairly standard rolls. You hit on this.
Yep.
You damage on this. No saves.
No saves.
I had the canopy, the hardened canopy.
You did have.
So I could.
There are some upgrades you can add.
Kind of a feel no pain.
Some damage avoidance, not an armor save, but damage avoidance.
Yeah.
The interesting thing where it comes into, and it's sort of like on paper, it is a simple game. This is probably one of the simpler games.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier while we were playing, and I was comparing this to like kind of the simple structure of these games is like you've got Aeronautica on the 40K side, and then you've got Warcry on AOS, and they're kind of similar in complexity.
Interesting.
For kind of your introductory to the lore, to the universe, to game mechanics even, I would say this maybe has a little bit more complexity
Than Warcry.
How
interesting. I've yet to play a game of Warcry, so I just know everybody's raving about it.
The one thing I would say though is and I think this is true in Warcry too, but I'm just going to talk about Aeronautica because that's why we're here today. Is there are some tactical decisions you can make that can really add to the depth of the game.
Yeah.
So something that we were talking about in our game, like if you intentionally like dive really quick, or you go up, you increase elevation beyond altitude 5, so you actually end up going into a stall. Going at high elevation makes you harder to hit. Going into a stall makes you harder to hit also. And then you have to, you make pilot checks to see if you can overcome recovering from the stall before you crash into the ground and die. But there are mechanics for that, and that adds depth and gameplay, and more knobs and levers to twist and pull in your playing of the game. And again, a relatively simple game.
Yeah.
It's just nice that it has those options baked in to give you a little more depth if you want to get into it, or if you just want to, go for a straightforward, let's play a game.
Yeah.
Let's play a dogfight.
Yeah.
You've got that too.
So I think that, the model range was fairly extensive.
Yeah. Super detailed models.
Super detailed, models. Tiny, easy to paint.
Yeah.
Super quick to get on the table. There was tons of modeling opportunities for building your terrain. Of course, they have to stand there. Everything was on a hex base, like a special hexagonal base, which is very similar to what they are now, except you just had freedom of movement. Again, it was on a 4x6 board, but you had this. Again, we already beat to death the immersion thing. I mean, for me, that's the one differentiator. Which makes it actually more difficult to get into.
Right, because now you need 8mm scale terrain for a 3D board, building up a 3D board space.
And in some ways, I mean, it's a barrier to overcome where the new version doesn't have that. You can still play it. You can utilize the current models. You could find models on eBay. You could 3D print chaos models. There's no chaos models available.
Yeah, no plastics there.
There's no point in that. There's probably hard to get the books. You could probably find them on eBay. They're probably not going for a whole lot of money. And
I think when this game released, being a niche community, but I get the feeling that it was a pretty small but diehard group of players playing this game.
Yeah.
Like people who were into it were really into it, like partially just because of the financial investment it took to play a relatively small game.
Yep.
But also it's not a mainstream game. Like this was the niche of a specialist games division anyways. Like it was always going to be kind of
it certainly didn't take off.
Yeah, right.
But we'll talk about the new edition and why would they do it again?
Yeah.
Right? If it's so niche, why would they do it again? And what our thoughts there are. But in general, like I've played it a few times. Like I said, I played with Justin Hill. He's the one that basically gave me my first game of it and taught me how to play it. And I was genuinely shocked at how much fun I had with it. and I felt like, oh, I missed the boat. Like it wasn't supported when he showed me how to play.
Yeah, it was
already
on
out of print.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, had I known, I might have gotten into this. But I also was thinking with today's thoughts, not thinking as we started putting this episode together, I wasn't thinking back about how difficult it actually was to get this stuff at the time.
Right. Yeah.
Like we would, as a group, I remember we would be like, somebody's going to place a Forge World order. Okay, hold on.
Yep.
Who wants something from Forge World? We would try to get over the magical $500 mark or whatever, 400 pound mark to get the free shipping, and so everybody, okay, I want this, I want that. And then it would arrive and we'd be like, it's here. Yeah. The stuff is here. Everybody come over. And I kind of, to some degree, I kind of miss that feeling. Like it was some excitement around it.
I don't think you haven't been in the hobby as long as I have. So I remember the days when it was just for anything. You wanted a bit from Games Workshop. You were calling a 1-800 number.
Yeah.
It was, I don't even remember, the mail order Gabo, something Gabo. But like, I used to do a lot of kit bashing and conversion work in the 90s.
Yeah.
So the early 90s even. So this was calling a phone number, like finding the number out of a product catalog that would come with, like most models would come with a product catalog of bits.
Yeah.
And be like, I need this dude so that I can convert him here. I need this shield. I need this lance. I need this guy.
Could you imagine if they still sold like that?
And it was all like over the phone, credit card number. This was before the internet.
Yeah. Holy smokes.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
So that's basically what Forge World was not too long ago.
Yeah. I mean, 10 years ago, this is what we were dealing with. So we have it really good right now.
Yeah. Pretty spoiled. It's easy.
All right. So we've talked about the whole first version of it. We're going to take a short break. We'll come back. We're going to talk about your version of it. And then as we go to close out the show, we're going to talk about kind of our assessment of the whole situation and where it sits. So we'll be right back. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll launch into the new version of Imperial Aeronautica.
Aeronautica Imperialis.
AI.
I got you.
Jeez, man.
I got you back.
It's a mouthful. All right, we are back. Now that we've gone over the first Aeronautica Imperialis, I had to read it that time, the first version of AI, which we'll call the Forge World version. Now we're going to talk about the specialist games, because Forge World is really transitioning to this specialist games model. So this is effectively, like, it's still put out by GW Prime, but it's supported by specialist games.
Supported by.
And so let's talk about Aeronautica Imperialis, the specialist games version.
Okay. Yeah.
The box game version. And Josh, you were more into this than I was. So walk me through it.
This, I got into this more recently, so I had to do a little retrospective history here to figure out some of the details of this. But I got into the game, and it's funny you mentioned Tabletop Simulator.
Mm-hmm.
The first game of this I actually played was with John Trotman, and he showed me how to play this game over Tabletop Simulator because it is a simple game. Like, he lives in Texas, I live in California.
Yeah. Actually, you raise an interesting point, and especially because it is less dependent upon line of sight than 40K.
Yep.
Your level, your elevation is all abstract, like 1 through 5.
And it's funny, in the rule book, it actually says, ahead of time, if you and your opponent wanted to agree on what an altitude level is, like,
it could be a kilometer, it could be,
but it's
meters.
Like, and the range they give, it's like, is that 100 meters or is that a kilometer? Like, so, and that's a huge difference of distance, and it doesn't matter.
They actually talk about arguing about it.
Yeah.
If you want to argue about it, go ahead.
Like, it doesn't matter what you choose that to be, but it just helps sets your narrative in your mind canon.
That's right.
Which is pretty cool. So
mind canon.
Yeah. Not dissimilar to how the original version played. This did release as a box set though, and Wings of Vengeance came out in 2019. And this was a box set containing Imperial Navy and orcs.
I first saw it, I think, at Adepticon. I think they unveiled it.
Probably at,
you could go back there and play it.
Nice. Yeah. So it's spiritual successor, and that there's a lot still in that box. And I guess the place to start is really what's different now, and then we'll get into how the game has expanded and evolved and supported here. It's pretty much everything you talked about. Like, there's still the initiative phase. You still check for tailing fire. You still set your maneuvers. How maneuvers are executed is the biggest difference in the game.
And so before you even talk about that,
Yep.
like going back to what you just said, as I knew how to play the original, and then we sat down to play this, I was like, oh, the turn order has literally not changed. Like, I didn't remember from the time I'd played previously. It is exactly the same.
Yes.
There's no difference. Like in terms of that order. And even I would argue, I guess maybe I'm not arguing, but even I would say the premise of each of those turns is exactly the same. Tailing fire being the big one. You're behind at this phase before anybody's moved.
Right.
If you are behind somebody, you get to shoot at them again.
Yep.
Okay, I get to shoot at you. Now we go to the movement phase, and I move, and you move, and I move, and you move. And then if you're still in range, I get to shoot at you again.
Right, yeah.
And still in range and in facing.
Yeah.
So, but that was exactly how it was in the original. Yeah. They've really just taken the rules and evolved them to a more structured field.
Right. I think they so the big thing there that we've alluded to and said already, but this game now uses a 2-inch hex grid system versus measurements.
Yeah.
Your
and
maneuvers
freeform turning, right?
Right. Your maneuvers are based upon hex movements. So you're going to need to move a certain amount of hexes in order to execute any of the maneuvers that you've chosen. There are 8 maneuvers to choose from total. Certain planes, depending on the kind of speed and flexibility of the craft, are able to access certain maneuvers. Some will get 1 to 5, some will get 1 to 7, some will.
And so let me talk about that too, because as somebody who just played it for the first time in a long time, the way that is done is actually pretty elegant.
Yes,
you have a sheet. On that sheet, it shows you here's all the different maneuvers, 1 through 8.
Yep.
8. Yeah. Okay, I'm flying a Thunderhawk. The higher the maneuver, like an 8, is incredibly flexible for an aircraft. So like an Eldar vehicle is going to be able to move at an 8, meaning it's going to be able to execute multiple turns and continue to flip around or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Have you seen Top Gun Maverick?
I have not seen it yet.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they deal with a plane that can do things that they can't do in their older plane. Like it's effectively that, right? But the way it's so elegant is the card for the Thunderhawk says you are able to execute maneuvers 1 through 4. 5, 6, 7, and 8 are not available to you.
Not an option.
And so every plane or aircraft basically says, hey, you can do 1 through 5, you can do 1 through 6, you can do 1 through 4, you can only do 1 through 3, and so it just becomes, oh, that's super easy.
Right.
It's always the same.
And that also represents the kind of flexibility of a plane, or the maneuverability of a plane in the maneuvers. And that if you have something that also takes into account pilot skills, and this translated in a way like 40K Elder planes can turn twice.
Right.
So they actually get access to maneuver number 8 in this game, where nobody else does. I think Necrons and Elder are the only ones that can get access to maneuver 8, which is some super crazy turn that you're going really fast at.
Right.
But what that does is, instead of using the cards where you're setting a single card down, you're choosing a maneuver. Each plane is locked into the access to what maneuvers it gets. So part of that is, I know, being across the table from you, you've got a Thunderhawk. That thing is not as fast or flexible.
Yeah.
So I know
particularly when the engines are damaged and you're only, was the scenario.
Right.
And you can only move at a max speed of 2 hexes.
Speed 2. So you're not going far, and you're not getting that fancy with your flying.
That is incredibly slow.
It is. Yeah, 2 is very slow.
I made 2 moves before I was blown out of the sky.
I've rolled well, but
okay. I'm also a terrible pilot.
Your tech marine didn't get to do his job.
No, never got his chance.
So there's some fun tactical kind of flexibility built in right there, or just tactical insight even. Like, I know what plane you're flying. I know basically where this is going to end up at the end of your flight, or educated guess. The other thing is not being tied to a card, but also having the maneuvers. They give you options. If you want to make your turns to the left, you want to make your turns to the right. It's baked into the type of maneuver.
Yeah.
So if you have gone first, or if your opponent has gone first and you're going second, you can respond to where other planes have ended their movements based upon the maneuver you've chosen.
Yes.
It's like, oh, he ended up here. I thought he was going to go here. Now I can
Instead of going right, I'm going to go left.
I can go left, and that's going to get me in better position.
I still have to execute the same maneuver.
Right. Yep.
But they're fairly flexible.
You've got several options. Some maneuvers have, 3 or 4 turn options built into them of which way you want to end up facing, how you want to turn. Do you want to go left? Do you want to go right? And final facing. So there is actually a lot of flexibility built in, which is the longest part of the game, is kind of figuring out where you want to end your movement, because maneuvers do have that flexibility built in.
I have to imagine that as you play this game more and you become much more familiar with each of the maneuvers, you get faster at that, but also you get a little better at anticipating, all right, well, I'm going to choose this maneuver because even though I think he might go here, if he doesn't, I have the flexibility then to still be in range. I won't be in my ideal range, but I'll still be where I need to be.
Yep.
Yeah. So I as having only played this version of it 2 or 3 times max, I could see how you could, once you've got it down and you're memorized, like, look, I know 1 is the standard move forward and turn. 3 is I want to do this, and you probably get a whole lot faster. But that is the long tail of, like, that is the longest part of the game.
Right.
Is that preparation for, okay, he's got that. We're going to alternate activation. So that adds another complexity level to it, where not to the game, but to your decision making. It
makes it more tactical, because you can be more reactive to what somebody has just done, knowing they still have 3 other planes that need to move too. So
many times you would win the initiative roll, but then say, no, you go first. Like, I'm going to let you go first. And then as it became important, you're like, I've won the initiative roll, which I think you won every initiative roll. I've won the initiative. Now I'm going to go first because now I know I want to shoot before you do, and I've got you on your back heels.
Right. More.
That was super fun, though.
To that tactical layering of the game.
But this is
for how mechanically simple the game is. There's some layers of depth to it, which is
no doubt
rewarding.
And especially when you tie that to the missions, and talk again about how important the missions are, but that becomes even more important to the decisions you're making. I lost my train of thought, but there was a point I wanted to make there about the movement. And we compared it to Robo Rally, and again, Robo Rally is a pretty famous game. Richard Garfield make Robo Rally?
I don't. Well, it's possible. I don't.
I don't want to commit to that, but it's a very well-known game where you have to move across a grid, and you're determining your movement before everything happens. And then things happen that may cause you problems in that movement. And 9 out of 10 times you've planned out your move, and you're like, no, wait a minute. He was supposed to turn left here, and I've chosen the wrong thing, And so, as you called it, the robo dance, you're facing the field, and you're saying, okay, right, and then you're turning your body right to go, okay, and then I'm going to go left. And I found myself doing that a little bit in this game too. So I like it.
That's a fond memory of Robo Rally.
It's a great game. It's a great game. Okay. So you have that movement phase, which again, I think is the longest, most complex, because once you're shooting, it's like you're prioritizing, who do I need to destroy first? So, but he hasn't shot yet.
And similar, being an alternate activation version game, if I have a chance to take out this plane before it fires, then that's a whole less thing you get to do this turn. So I get to, just put my advantage to advantage.
Right.
So that, the biggest difference between the 2 versions of the game,
is the hexes.
Rules wise, is the maneuvering. It's the hex. So, shooting is all range banded now. So there's short, medium, and long ranges, and those are based upon a number of hexes. So short,
and that's the same for everybody.
It's the same for every plane.
What changes 1 to 4 short.
1 to 4 short, 5 to 7 medium,
8 to 10.
8 to 10 long.
Is long. And that's it. That's the same for everybody. Now, what it'll show you on your card is
number of firepower dice you get.
Yeah, number of dice you get to roll against something at that range. Some things are better at medium range. Some things are better at long range. Some things can't shoot at short range.
Correct.
And it'll just have a 0 there. You don't get to roll a die.
Some things can't shoot at long range.
There you go.
Like your all your heavy bolters.
Shut up.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, I mean, it's very straightforward.
Yeah.
It kind of backs into the range thing. Like it's a little different. Like you don't see next to each weapon a range of number of hexes. It's just like all the hexes are this.
Yep. It's the same for every plane.
It lowers your firepower if you're not in the right distance.
Yep. Yep.
So a lot of your maneuvering is trying to get into that key distance. If it's medium range for these things, you want to get there. So you're unloading all your.
You want to get in the sweet spot
cannons.
distance.
Yeah.
You want to get in the sweet spot altitude wise, and
ideally behind them.
and you want to get in the sweet spot position.
Yeah.
So there's kind of three things you're trying to do at the same time. Of like, if you can get a shot that, oh, I've got you in my front arc and I'm just outside of yours, and then I'm going to be able to sneak in behind you. And have a field day.
Yeah.
So I mean. Aside from that, mechanically very similar to the original versions.
Yeah.
So I think we can
shockingly similar.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like it was shocking how close it is.
Which I mean,
it's just actually more accurate because the hex situation.
Right. Yeah. And there's let's say one thing they call out, and this is something that you or I think initially very against or disliked about the game, was that the rule book calls out that this is designed, aerial combat takes place so high up in the atmosphere that terrain isn't going to be a big issue. So the default game for this is no terrain. Like it's open. They do have two options built in. One is bad weather and one is night fighting. So there are rules baked in for that. Weather is kind of cool in that it's set at an altitude level. So maybe there's bad weather at altitude 3.
Right.
So anything below that takes a penalty. Anything above that,
so you can choose to go down into the bad weather for cover,
which you can do defensively. But if you're playing a mission where you need to do a bombing run or something like that, that bad weather is going to play effect into that also. So there's some cool things baked in, not terrain wise, but rules wise to kind of give you that sense.
That's kind of cool.
And night fighting is penalty to shooting, and you can't shoot as far, and you're not as good at it.
Right.
So that's kind of cool. There are two options baked in, which I'll just talk about now, for adding terrain to the game. And one is you can absolutely just add terrain elements to the game. And what they say thematically, this represents your topping mountain peaks, tall hive cities, spires, things like that would be up where aerial combat's actually happening. Yeah. And mechanically, how you execute this in the game is you just set, this is a piece of terrain in there. You can absolutely put it on the hex base. Like you could take a mountain and just have it fill up a certain amount of hexes, and it can be abstract, or if it spills over a hex, you like that. You just call that hexes. Counts as being occupied by terrain. And what you need to do, if in that case, is you just need to choose what altitude level that terrain is going up to. Mm-hmm. So if you say this goes up to altitude 5, that means it's impassable. So your planes cannot fly over that because altitude 5 is the max that planes are able to participate in this game. If something is altitude 3, for example, then you can fly over that as long as you are flying at an altitude of 4 or 5. Yeah. But it would be impassable if you're below that. If you're flying at an altitude equal to or below that terrain height, you're going to crash into it and blow up. Not a good thing to do. But there are absolutely options for that. So you can bring the 3D elements of the game into that to get more of that narrative immersion in there. And there are mechanics baked into that for just have a quick conversation of what this is set to and go from there. Because it is hex-based, there's a little bit of abstraction you need to do, potentially depending on the pieces of terrain that you have for the models to actually physically fit there. Right. But it should be pretty easy to keep track of where a model is because of the hexes, even if you end up stopping a turn halfway.
It's pretty straightforward.
You guys can figure it out. The other option there is for terrain is called a low altitude fight. And this is representing you flying through a city. So this is planes
or canyons or whatever
city
you want
canyon.
to do. Yeah.
They're actually, speaking of canyons, there is a scenario, and I think you mentioned this before, of it's a canyon fight scenario what it does is it's kind of like the Rolling Roads Necromunda system that it does, where you are flying through this canyon and the board is actually going to move under your planes to represent you guys flying through this canyon.
That's awesome.
It's great, especially if you have some curves and things like that planes need to maneuver around. So you know what's coming. You have a little bit of time, and then there's it's going to be more like that classic Star Wars or Top Gun aerial dogfight where people are crashing into canyon walls and rocks and things like that.
As you do.
But,
which never actually really happens, but cool.
So what that one does mechanically is it sets your max altitude at 2, I believe. So it's going to be a very low fight. So you're at 1, 2, or 0 if you're actually going to land on the ground. And what happens if you're going to fly into a building, a wall, a rock, whatever, you have to make a pilot check then to see if basically you can
avoid it,
maneuver around that, and then you maneuver the minimum distance possible to avoid said obstacle.
Pilot checks are just set by the pilot number. It's usually like a 3+, 4+.
3+, 4+, 5+, depending on the plane. Each plane type has its own pilot handling skill is what they call it. So there are options to integrate terrain into the game, which I think is great that they have those. And then missions we were talking about. Also, there are a variety of missions which really open up different ways of how to play the game above and beyond just dogfighting.
I completely agree. And this is where the game is surprising in the narrative it can tell.
Yes.
I was going to wait to the end of the show to talk about it, but a long time ago, Jeff and I talked about Double Eagle. In fact, we interviewed Dan Abnett, who wrote Double Eagle. It's a book about aeronautical combat, right?
Yeah.
And I remember when I was going to read the book, I thought, at the time, there was not a lot of 40K books out there. And at the time, I was like, how do you write a book about just a bunch of dogfights? I mean, that's got to get repetitive. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, considering who wrote it.
Yeah.
The book is fantastic, but it has these scenes where these low altitude combats, and in particular, there's one where they're flying, along this coastline or over this ocean, and there's rock formations that are sticking out of the ocean, and they dive down there. They're trying to avoid getting hit or whatever by the enemy, and so they're swooping around these things, and I'm just like, visually, that's amazingly thematic.
Yes. Yeah.
This game can capture that feeling.
Yes.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
And just to talk to some of the variety of the missions that there are missions where you are landing troops to go assault a ground asset. There are ground assets that can be purchased. You just pay points for them.
Dropship command.
Yeah, exactly.
Drop fleet commander, dropship commander. What was that game?
Both. They both exist.
I don't play either of them.
I
played them once.
Drop ship is the one that most people are playing, where it's the actual troop landing.
There's stuff like that. There's stuff where you're picking up troops and recovering people. There's canyons.
Canyon runs, escorting bombers off the map. There are search and rescues, bombing runs. Depending on which mission you're playing, it'll actually you choose your mission, then you choose how many points. And each mission has a recommendation on how many points to play. Sometimes the attacker will have more points, or the defender will have more points, or sometimes it'll be like the defender has to take a ground asset unit in this, and that'll be like a flak cannon or some missiles or some ground-based missiles that because the attacker is trying to do something. They're trying to bomb your assets or something like that. So built into the scenarios, there's some options for that. And those models do exist, which we'll get into in a minute here. I think now's just a good point to jump into how it released, how it launched.
Yeah, let's talk about how you get into it and what you can buy.
So going back to 2019, the Wings of Vengeance box dropped, and this features Imperial Navy and Orcs. You get a handful of planes. It's 5 or 6 planes for both. I think you get 4 Imperial planes and 5 Orc planes.
Yes, that is correct.
And this came with, the rules book in there is very thorough as far as the rules go.
It's thin.
This is not a hardback book. What it has, and that only came with the dogfighting scenario. So I'm curious if this is the rule book.
That's probably the situation
when you dip your toes into this the first time, because it only has the dogfight scenario in there. It has everything you need to.
Which is, again, it's interesting. Yeah. Not the best representation of this game.
Right.
Like it really isn't.
Yeah.
And
it's still fun. It captures some of that X-Wing feel.
yeah, but it's interesting from like a starter set, box set. I almost call that that's the one failure of this set. Like they had 3 missions. One's this, one's an escort, and one's this. One's a bomb run. You're set. Right.
Yep.
But the dogfight limited my enjoyment of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't until my eyes were open to the broader, there's all this, this is really cool.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. There's way more depth in there. So after this it had how to play rules, the squadron list for orcs and Imperials. It does have a decent amount of lore in there.
Yeah.
Of just, aerial combat, 40K.
Yeah.
Universe, etc. And then scenarios that only had that single dogfight, as we talked about there. Shortly thereafter, I think it was 6 months or so later, they came out with the Rin's World Air Campaign book, and this is
it's future history.
It's future history. So this is Rin's World, as we know, which is the orc invasion of Rin's World, which is where the Crimson Fists are based out. The Crimson Fists are mentioned in the book, but they're
right. That's a whole different.
We didn't
part
have
of the
Space
fight.
Marine models at this point,
Right.
so this is really Imperial Navy, right? They're getting decimated on the planet and in space, not in the air.
Right.
So this focuses on Imperial Navy and orcs. This has a ton of lore for Rin's World and the campaign there. This added scenarios, so this has 7 scenarios in it. There are 6 narrative scenarios specific to Rin's or more narrative, which are similarly featured later in later books. But then it also has dogfight on top of that, so you always got to have the dogfight in there. The big thing this one added was campaign rules and rules for things like ground assets, leveling up pilots, replacing lost planes,
And
ace pilots, all that. Yeah. And that's part of the campaign system in there.
Yeah, okay.
So that was kind of...
That was just included in the original.
Right, that was baked in for the original.
But I see why it wasn't in the first.
Right.
Again, I think the only failure of that starter set was the single mission.
Yep.
Everything else in it's fantastic. And I think a good deal for what you're paying.
Yeah, I don't remember what the retail is because I got it after it had gone out of print, but I got a really good deal on it. So, okay, so that is the first expansion. With that, shortly there followed up, we get the Taros Air War campaign, another famous Forge World coverage of the Taros Wars. And this is going to feature Imperial Navy, Astra Militarum, and Tau.
This is the introduction of Tau into...
This brings Tau into Aeronautica Imperialis.
Okay.
So again, this has a bunch of lore in the backgrounds of this fight, the future history. This expands a few rules, and this includes some things like low altitude, terrain heights. This adds more just elements to the game, brings it more into the game that we know it to be today. This has the rolling areas of engagement, falling behind, etc., and that's kind of that rolling roads version. This includes 5 scenarios, narrative, again, focused.
It should be said, like, most of these scenarios, like even the Rin's World one, can be repurposed to something.
Yes, absolutely.
Else.
Yeah, 100%. And these aren't, to my knowledge or recollection, these aren't so specific as the previous Imperial Armor books were to be like, you need to have...
Right. No, they're not.
3 DACA jets, you need to have 4...
They've moved away from that, and I think smartly.
Yeah. Yes.
That was way too limited.
People's collections are going to be way more flexible and varied than the prescribed lists tend to be. This again had more campaign rules, more ground asset rules, and these are just expanding. They're adding more assets, more models that they ended up releasing with that too. And the Tau models were the big thing that came with this release. Shortly thereafter, we get the Wrath of Angels box, and this is in 2021. This adds Space Marines and Eldar to the fight. So there are multiple Space Marine units now. So in the box itself, it came with a couple of Xiphon fighters and I believe Storm Eagles.
Yep.
And then the Eldar came with Nightwings and Phoenix Bombers. And this brought the Eldar to life on table, brought the Space Marines to life, because before that there was only Imperial Army Imperial Navy, and the Astra Militarum are more of the just the planes, less of the Navy planes, but the other ones. So this brought them to life. These ended up coming out as separate boxes as well after the box set. So mostly it's a model release. It does have some player mats. Each of the boxes comes with a play mat.
I'd love to get a hold of that box, but
That one you should be able to find.
Yeah, I'm looking.
So the interesting thing, well, I guess we'll just cover that in a minute.
Yeah.
What comes out in 2022 is the compendium. So there have been rules being released for Eldar and things like that, and Necrons in White Dwarf articles supporting this. So there is some White Dwarf support in there. What the compendium has done now in 2022 is it compiles all of those rules in one place and puts it into a
So
book.
if I were going to start this game, I just should buy the compendium.
It depends what you're playing, and it depends if you need it or not, or if you can find it, because that's also hard to find right now.
Oh, man. Okay. Again,
part of this is Games Workshop, I think, ramping up so much of their production cycle for 10th edition and those box sets that I think a lot of this stuff will come back.
I've seen the truckload of
shortly
games that he got up there.
His store.
His store is too small for all those games.
It's a warehouse that happens to have a store, and it was really living up to the warehouse half of that name. So this has all the rules for fielding Necrons. It has the rules for fielding all the Eldar. All 4 of the Adeptus Astartes aircraft were collated into print for the first time. So the rules had been snuck out there, but they...
Oh, but does this contain like just the core rules?
It also has
a copy of the core rules, which are not long. Right. So, I mean, okay.
Yep. This has all the profiles for everything. This brings back, there's multiple Imperial factions now. There's the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Navy, and Adeptus Astartes. So there's 3 Imperial factions, all with different planes. So this is bringing them all into, this is kind of you should start here if you're starting late in the game.
Gotcha.
But again, it depends what you're playing and if you need this or not.
Okay.
Because as we'll get into, there's some more options. The one cool thing this thing added was there are expanded rules for damage and limited ammo. I say actually one of the larger differences to mention, going back to that, is that most weapons in this game do not have an ammo limitation.
But some special weapons.
Where the original Aeronautica, most weapons, I believe, were limited ammunition.
I don't recall. I'd have to go back and look. But either way, I think that's kind of a pointless metric to keep track of. But there are some special weapons, like maybe special
weapons, missiles, bombs, things like that.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
They're limited in capacity. You only get so much payload on a plane. Right. And there's also some fuel. Some planes have a limited fuel. So normal game will play 12 turns. Right. Some planes don't have 12 turns worth of fuel. So you need to get in there, get your job done, and then safely fly off the edge of the board. So
not if Josh is wrong.
I'll just make the game short for you. You're not going to run out of fuel.
Did speed it
You're
up.
going to run out of life.
You're going to run out of fuel. It's all going to burn up in an explosion.
It's just a beautiful ball of fire in the sky. It's pretty, though. The cool thing the damage does, though, if you do want to play dogfight, it gets way more granular, and this is more of a way to give you an armor save of you took damage, you roll to see what that damage does. Right. Was that a structure point? Was that
engine damage?
Something goes offline, engine's damage. What it leads more to is potentials for you creating smoke, which can create cover behind you. But it can also lead you to be more likely to drop into a spin or a stall or something like that.
So you can make the game like basically more complicated if you want to, utilizing some of these rules.
It's definitely more granular in the damage. I watched a battle report of this just because I was curious to see, I don't know, like six months ago. And these guys were like, okay, you don't want to do this for every shot because
I wouldn't think so.
I
think one of the great elements of the game is that it's not that granular.
Yeah. Yes.
I
like that it's an option. Like smoke trailing is something cool. But I think if you do a point of damage, you should do a point of damage. Otherwise, it actually gets really hard to kill planes because it's hard to hit planes anyway.
It's already hard. You're hitting on a 5.
Right. Yeah. It's 5 at best.
Yeah.
It only gets worse from there. So that's basically the compendium in the book. And what really got me into Aeronautica, I had played some games beforehand, but what got me to really buy in is when they came out with the Horus Heresy book. And that's the one I've got here. What that does is it's entirely Imperial units because it's Horus Heresy.
Right.
There are rules for every single legion. I'm sorry, I'm playing too much Titanicus. There's rules for every single legion, and that's an upgrade point you can give per plane that will give you some sort of thematic mechanical benefit
right.
for playing that Legion.
Right.
Thousand Suns, for example, being the Legion that I play, because it ties into Titanicus also, is they have the ability to, they're the Corvidae pilots, so they have a kind of a precognition which lets them ignore weather effects, the night fighting weather effects, and then they can also once per turn ignore a range or an altitude penalty, because they're like, oh, like I'm going to psychically know where this guy's going to be before he's there. So it gives you, so it's just a cool little thematic thing that,
that's really cool.
Brings it to life, which is great. So this model wise, it's all the Adeptus Astartes models. It's all the Imperial Navy models. And there is, with this, they released a, one of the Custodes Ares gunships.
Nice.
So there is a single Custodes model represented. Custode. I'll say it wrong every time. I think that there's
that's
one
okay.
or two
I can't say Aeronautica Imperialis.
Hey, you just did. Yeah, so very thematic. There's not a campaign system to go with it in the book, but it has all the rules. It has all of the planes, all the stats for the planes, and all of the loadouts. And this has 8 scenarios in it, including a dogfight scenario.
Perfect.
But yeah, this is where I got into it mostly
to supplement
Titanicus
and potentially Epic coming up.
Because same scale as Titanicus. I have my Thousand Suns Astartes Legion planes here, which will tie into my Legio Zistobiox Titans, because they were pals there on Prospero. So it's like, if nothing else, even if I hate the game, I've got cool planes because the models are amazing. In the same scale as Titanicus, that I can personally create narrative missions for in games of Titanicus. And then if I have extra planes that I, don't want to play with the game, for example, they're going to make really cool terrain.
Yeah, they are.
So I picked it up and happened to really enjoy the game.
Well, fantastic.
It's fast, it's simple, it's got depth to it.
How popular is this game now?
I'd say it's more popular than the original release, but it's still fairly niche. We are in a game market that's pretty saturated for choices. This is not going to be a main game. It's a box game from Games Workshop, so it's already not one of their main games that they're doing. But as we've talked about here, they've done 4 or 5 kind of major releases for it, so it's well supported.
Clearly it's well supported, right? Now, some of the stuff's hard to get on their site right now. I don't know if that's indicative of where it's going or indicative of everything being launched towards 10th edition at the moment.
Time will tell. I'm sure we'll know in the next year. All the models are available, depending which book. And so the reason I was alluding to, like, do you need the compendium or not? It depends. Like, I'm playing mostly Horus Heresy. I have the Heresy book.
So
I don't need the compendium. That's all I need.
But if I want to play,
I also have
41st Millennium.
Yes. If you want to play 41st Millennium and you want to play Eldar, you want to play Tau, you want to play Necrons, you should probably pick up the compendium if you can get your hands on that one. Necrons we didn't talk about because they are not in a major release other than the compendium.
They haven't got the box set.
They're not in a box set. There's not a campaign for them. And part of that is getting into just talking about the models of the game. I'll jump ahead there. And that the Necrons are exclusively Forge World releases still. So they are still only available in resin, and there are only there's 3 options. One kit I think is a double kit.
Interesting.
Those are only available in resin. So there is no plastic release for Necrons, but the rules come with them. So you can get the rules out of the model kits. They're also available in the compendium or some of those White Dwarf articles. The Eldar is interesting because they're a split. There are two plastic models for Eldar, and then there are also 2 resin models for Eldar, also Forge World available. And there's a handful of other models available through Forge World, like that Ares gunship we talked about. There's the Arvis Lighter, which is just a very popular. You gotta have it. It's the classic little shuttle. There's some drones for the Tau. So there is some specialist games, Forge World support for this, but the majority of the game is in plastic and readily available at your friendly local game store or online.
All right. Let's do this. Let's take a break. Let's come back. And then talk about just in general, we've kind of seeded it with our thoughts through the whole thing, but talk about where we think like this fits. I know it's not a core game as we were just talking about, but I think it fits into a very unique and interesting idea
to the point where I'm now trying to find, like, all right, let me buy some.
Get a couple models. Yeah.
Let me get some of this. I already texted Sky earlier today at Herrick Games, and I was like, hey, what do you got in terms of Eldar stuff at the, thing? But I'm going to place an order and get some stuff going because I did enjoy playing our game today. Will I play it a lot? No, but I think I've got some ideas, and it certainly has some cool narrative potential. So let's take a break, and we'll be right back to talk about all that and then close out the show.
Sounds great.
Right. All right, and we are back to kind of close out the show, but close out some thoughts here too. And we've talked a lot about the differences and more similarities than I realized between the two editions. But here's my take is we talked about this after our game a little bit. I would not play a lot of this game in the sense of I'm going to go to a tournament, or I'm going to go to, maybe I would go to like an Adepticon and go, I'm going to play a few games of this. But where I see, for me, the value in this game is as you look at the pantheon of Games Workshop games, whether it's Battlefleet Gothic, Adeptus Titanicus, 40K, Kill Team, Combat Patrol, whatever you want to do. For narrative events, this adds just yet another way to play a narrative event.
Right, yeah.
And a lot of the campaigns we've run or narrative events are based upon, did you win or lose? Yada, yada. This team gets more points. This team moves, whatever the case may be. In a lot of those instances, it doesn't matter what game or what size of game you are playing. It still counts. And so
it calls out specifically different game systems too,
yes.
Right? So yeah.
And so to have it would be fun to have a game day here where it was like you come and you're going to play a game of, hypothetically, because this would probably take too long, but a game of Battlefleet Gothic, a game of Aeronautica Imperialis, and a game of 40K at a certain size.
Yeah.
And then, or over a weekend, and you have to rotate through each of those, and you're telling this kind of story of whatever battles are going on, but you would get like the sense of like the whole theater of war as opposed to just, and the reason I leave Adeptus Titanicus out of that, because I know that's your favorite, is because
I'm going to talk about it,
is because it's also limited to 30K at this point.
Right. Yeah. Which is fair.
And I get why they've done that. I totally get it. I'm waiting for the day where like Eldar Titans are on the board.
I'm sure it's coming.
I hope so.
I hope so also. It's obviously going to change Titanicus as a game quite a bit.
But this, you could have.
I'm here for it.
But like this, you can have two branching
right.
that are the same, but branching.
Same rule set, different playgrounds.
Yeah.
So something that really appeals to me very much to what you were just speaking of is in Horus Heresy, so at this scale or even smaller, is you have Battlefleet Gothic. Then you have Aeronautica Imperialis. Then you have Adeptus Titanicus on the game. And then maybe even smaller than that, you have Epic, if that is in fact coming. And just being able to integrate all those, like tell that same story in these different theaters of war using these different games and systems, which are all games that I enjoy and play and have that collection. So part of my reason for getting into the game is that I saw that as a potential. So I'm building a Space Marine. Battlefleet Gothic fleet, and then I have Titanicus, and then I have Aeronautica, and I had a Horus Heresy, Thousand Suns army, but I didn't have much of a local scene, so got out of that. But there's other things that check that box for me, and if I skip the actual 40K scale, the 28mm scale of that, like there's still so much potential to tell a cool story.
For sure. And I think it slots nicely in there.
Right.
And so easy to learn.
Yeah. And
so quick to play. Like, in the time it takes you to play a game of 40K, 9th edition. I don't know about 10th. I'm going to assume it's roughly the same
2 to 3 hours for a game. Yeah.
You could play 2 to 3 games this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Standard game as called out in the rulebook is 45 to 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And if you're just doing a small, like 2-on-2 plain dogfight, that's obviously going to be even quicker than that.
Yeah.
And to what you alluded before, the more experienced you are with the game, the faster that you're going to go because you're going to know how those maneuvers are going to play out in your mind. You're going to do that robot dance upstairs instead of in person. And get there even faster.
And what I would say is if you were to run a team game of this, I see that slowing down drastically.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Because all of a sudden it's like, okay, what are you going to do? What am I going to do? You would have to talk in general terms. Like you focus on this part of the battle airspace.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll focus on
Area
this
of
part,
engagement.
Area of engagement. I'm sure the battle space is,
Yes.
I think, what they call it.
That's fair.
I don't know.
It's area
One of the
engagement
guys,
in this version.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the guys I work with is a retired colonel from the Air Force, and now he was constantly talking like as he came over to the corporate side of things. He uses these terms like battle rhythm, and we're like, yeah, dude, we're not in a battle. We're just putting out software, man. We're just running a service.
Oh,
so
that's a battle rhythm.
So, I honestly, like, I thought I didn't like this game. I literally thought I didn't like this game. And now I'm like,
turns out you do.
Sky.
Yeah.
What do you got in there?
Yeah,
Right. Okay. I got to order some from Forge World. Dang it. I just placed the order with Forge World.
Well, you'll be there tomorrow, so you can see what he's got in stock.
Well, I won't
and
be
pick some up.
Yeah, at Sky's, not
Sky
at Forge
Shop.
World.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, like, yeah, I mean, now, did they come out with this to go head to head with X-Wing? X-Wing was doing very, very well. Like, do you see this as Games Workshop's, we have a flying game.
We've got planes. We can put a game
right.
out for that. Short answer, yes, I think so. I think they saw there was demand in the market, and there's enough people who are already invested in the lore and background of the 30K, 40K universe that there would absolutely be some people that would jump over and cross over and enjoy this game. And it's a great game in its own right.
Yeah.
Lore or anything independent of that. I think the short answer is absolutely yes. Obviously, I don't think this game caught on to the same extent that X-Wing did. And
clearly not.
I think even X-Wing's dying out. In
X-Wing is. It
too.
was very, very popular for a long time, though.
I think once that new edition of it came out, from what I'm recalling, I haven't played the new version of X-Wing. I did play quite a bit of the old. So I think that's dying out, and I don't know the reason why of that. If just people are wanting, different scale, different complexity. Maybe there wasn't enough tactical depth and layers in that. It became more about the upgrades and kind of gotcha moments versus just the pure gameplay.
Yeah.
It's kind of the sense I got from it.
It's very interesting. I mean, it's a whole other topic, but it's very interesting that why can a game like that hold your attention for X amount of time?
Yeah. And
then kind of burn out. But a game like Warhammer 40,000 goes 30 plus years, 40 plus years. How many are? Oh God, I'm old.
30 plus, yeah.
30 plus years and continues to. I mean, it's not like Star Wars is lacking in material. There's movies, shows, books. What is it that I don't know what that differentiator is?
Part of it, I would say, to that point, is that Star Wars games, miniature tabletop games for Star Wars, have diversified quite a bit. X-Wing was kind of the only thing for a while. There was a Star Wars miniature game way back then, but now you have Legion, you have Shatterpoint, you have Imperial Assault. Like there are a lot of options out there for Star Wars now. So people aren't only like X-Wing's not the only option.
That is true.
There are a lot more players in that space now.
I think that's probably a fair point. That's a fair point. And I think you demoed the Shatterpoint.
Yeah, Damage Shatterpoint.
Everybody,
I definitely enjoy where that's going and how it plays. It's a super different game from any other miniature game I've played.
I think that's important.
Yeah, and I think it really brings Star Wars to life too. And I played Legion as well. Like I still have a Legion Force that nobody else in my area plays, but I played 30 games of that and really enjoyed how much it brought Star Wars to life on the table there.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's not like it's the small popular, not a popular franchise,
right?
know?
Yeah.
Maybe it's also kind of a mix of, the people that enjoy Star Wars don't necessarily enjoy miniatures games. I mean, there's some, if you look at a Venn diagram, there's some crossover.
It's a pretty popular, right? Percentage wise, it's a small percentage of Star Wars fans are also going to be miniature game players, but I think it's a very healthy population for that game. But it is more of a tournament focused game, I think, is how the company is pitching it and how the meta has taken.
And I
it.
guess the way Warhammer came about was really a miniature game first. Now people are scrambling to, hey, why don't they make in TV shows and movies?
Right? Yeah. It's
Which
the opposite path.
That's a whole other discussion because I feel like they'd be very expensive to make, and even if you could make them good, I think that
we'll see what
I don't know that it's going to be as well, he is my hero.
It's coming. Yeah.
I'm like one of the few people that love Man of Steel. Like, I think it's the best Superman. I'll go on record. I think it's the best Superman movie yet. So I'll leave it at that. I know I got a lot of disagreement there, but I'm also a huge Zack Snyder fan. So what do you know? Anyway, I mean, I think that's where it fits, right? I got to say, I'm glad we did this show on it because it definitely changed my mind. And we'll play some more. And
absolutely,
this should not be hard to get on the table very quickly. So,
and part of the reason I mentioned I picked up the game because I can tie it into Titanicus if I don't enjoy it, or the models are just cool if I want to make terrain out of them, like worst case scenario.
For sure.
But it's also it's a very fun game. It's light, it's fast, it's easy to pick up. There's tactical depth. Like this one, I would actually probably play with my wife, and like she's a very avid board game player. Yeah. But she's not really into miniature games nearly as much. But like she played X-Wing with me. Maybe she would play this with me.
I bet she would.
She probably would. And I don't know. It's just not going to she wouldn't request it, but
she
would play it.
And I think she'd have fun while she played it.
Yeah,
but then,
exactly.
Yeah. I think our wives are not geared in the same way.
Call to her art. But just speaking on the campaign points and how this game could be a really nice supplemental to other games is the campaign we were playing in Adepticon, the system there, how they actually had Aeronautica tie in. So it was all kind of one joint effort of the traders and Imperials defending or conquering a planet. And there was Titanicus happening for 4 days and Aeronautica Imperialis happening for 2 days, fighting over the exact same planet, airspaces, things like that. Yep. And they were using those two very separate game systems to track campaign points. So
yeah. And I mean, one wasn't worth more than the other. I mean, if you won, this moved. If you didn't, the other person moved.
Right. Yeah. A game was a game.
That was a great campaign system. Visually, it was super cool.
Yeah.
So we got some pictures of it that I've put up, but it's pretty awesome. So anyway, okay. I think we're covered. Like, that's good.
That's the game in a nutshell.
I love it. Yeah. All right. We're coming out with episodes the 1st and 15th of every month. So thanks for listening. I think seem to be going very well so far. People seem to be enjoying the content. I'm glad we're back. I think we're having a lot of fun with it so far.
Absolutely.
We're loving the YouTube aspect of it. It does take a bit longer to set up and get ready and edit for poor Josh here.
It's worth it.
But I appreciate it. But it seems like I appreciate what it brings.
Yeah, nice. Same. And people are engaging very positively. Lots of good engagement there, and people really appreciating, especially things like the elite choice, being able to see on the screen what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So if you haven't yet, go take a look, check it out. Yeah. Hopefully it's for you. I think it's probably a cool thing to have in the kind of background while you're painting or hobbying or what have you. Whereas previously with all the, what am I trying to say? Transport back and forth from work, people were doing, while they were doing that, they were listening. Now you get the best of both worlds. Anyway, so if you could, please leave us a review on iTunes, vote us on YouTube,
give us a
subscribe there. Smash that like button. Ugh. Oh God, I'm too old.
I didn't say it.
I know. It's just, I thought it would be stupid, and it was.
Success.
Still working on Patreon stuff. Josh and I need to figure out a couple things there still, and we got to do some recording. But one idea that Josh threw out is we'll also put some of the outtakes from our video stuff onto the Patreon.
Funny thing about doing video is that we're rolling away before the mic starts recording. So we have some really fun behind the scenes bloopers, outtakes.
We think they're fun.
But
you sent me that clip and I was like, oh my God, that was really funny.
Definitely going to be some future Patreon content.
Yeah. And as you know, we have a Facebook group, and actually because we've started the show again, people are starting to come in and subscribe to that Facebook group again. Like I hadn't seen. In fact, I think I don't know if you're an admin on that yet.
I am, yeah.
Okay.
I've been for a couple of weeks.
Okay, good. But remember, if you invite people to join, unfortunately, they don't get the questionnaire.
and we automatically decline people who have not answered the questionnaire. So if you want your friends, and I know that limits who comes in, and that's fine with me because we have prevented a lot of spam.
Yeah.
Trust me, we've prevented
Keep the bots
lot of spam from coming into that group as a result of this policy. So if you have friends that you're like, hey, you should check out this group, you can tell them where to find the group, but they'll have to go in and answer the questions. And they don't even necessarily have to answer them correctly. You just, like one will say, who are the hosts of the show? I've had people go, I don't know. I haven't listened to it yet. That's fine. That's fine. Accepted.
It's a person answering that question.
Yeah, it's a person answering it. So anyway, there you go. So Josh, you got anything else to throw out there before we kind of close it out?
Yeah, the only other thing I would say just to Aeronautica is it's a very low barrier of entry.
Good point.
Check it out. You can pick up the box. The main box, Wings of Vengeance, or the first box, I should say, is out of print or out of availability off GW site.
But you
right
can
now.
find it
It
around
may
still.
come back. It's still out there, and you can get it for a relatively inexpensive price. Like I think I picked mine up for about $40. And again, if you're splitting that with a friend because you want to check it out together, like $20 a person to play a whole new game that unlocks a bunch of potential for campaigns. And anyways, it's a fun game on its own right. So it's worth checking out.
Right on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, until next time, this is Carl.
This is Josh.
And we're coming to you from the Astronomicon, where you can see the light regardless of your elevation.
And spaceships!
They're not space. Well, some of them are spaceships. I guess they can all fly in space.
Oh, there's an upgrade for rocket boosters that lets you go to 6 on the altitude and go
Nice.
in.
Nice.
Anyways, yeah, I know they're.
It's just like Fast and Furious 9.
Well, yeah, you were telling me about that not too long ago. Ridiculous.
All right. We'll see you next time. This episode of The Independent Characters is protected by the Creative Commons license. If you have further questions as to its use, you can find information on the front page at theindependentcharacters.com.